Let's move on. And I'm going to move a little bit quickly through all of this because I want to leave time for a few questions at the end of the lecture. Let's talk about physical attractiveness as number 2 of the more interesting 4. Now, physical attractiveness is one that really bothers us. We don't like to believe that physical attractiveness accounts for much in life. It seems unfair. Except at the margins, there isn't much we can do about physical attractiveness. And when we're not pictured in the rumpus, it can really hurt, you know. So we don't like to believe that physical attractiveness matters. And the interesting thing is if you do surveys of college students and you say to them, rate how important different characteristics are in relationships that you might be involved in, they will say that warmth is important, sensitivity is important, intelligence is important, compassion is important, sense of humor is important, and they'll say that looks aren't important. But if you measure all of those things, let's do it in a different order. If you send everybody out on a blind date, and then you look at, after the blind date, how many of those people who are matched up blindly actually go on a second date? Actually get together again? What predicts who gets together again? Was it the rating of warmth? No. Sensitivity? No. Intelligence? No. Compassion? No. Sense of humor? No. What was it? Looks. So we believe that looks don't matter. And unfortunately, they do. Now, the good news in all of this is the studies that looked at physical attractiveness in this way were just looking at what predicts a second date after a first date. Obviously, what predicts a long-term relationship are probably things less superficial than looks, or at least other things in addition to looks. But it is a great predictor of a second date. And college students, year after year, say, but it's not important. And it's one of those classic dissociations between what we think is important and what empirically turns out to be more important. All right, well, there are very interesting studies that have been done with physical attractiveness. At the University of Minnesota, a computer algorithm paired people up. Couldn't have been a very complicated algorithm because it basically paired people up randomly on the campus. But a lot of data about all the students on campus were collected, and people were then randomly paired up and sent to the dance, and then they were tracked over time. And just as in the thought experiment I just gave you, the University of Minnesota students acted in the same way. If they rated their partner as attractive, the randomly assigned partner, they were more likely to continue the relationship. Now, it's interesting to ask why, and we have to start to look at other experiments to try to get at what is it about physical attractiveness that makes people want to pursue the relationship. And once again, Elliot Aronson, the person who did the blunder experiment, the pratfall experiment, he did some nice work on attractiveness as well. And in one experiment, which many people know as the frizzy wig experiment, he did the following. He invited a Confederate, a graduate student who was working with him in his lab. Social psychologists always called people who were in the employ of the experimenter Confederates. Doesn't mean that they grew up south of the Mason-Dixon line or wave a certain kind of flag. But the older term for it was stooge. They would say, we hired a stooge to act in the following role in the experiment. But I think a certain generation of college students thought stooges were only named Moe, Larry, and Curly. And so they started to use this phrase Confederate. Now they'll usually just say we hired an actor. But anyway, the Confederate that they hired was a woman who is naturally attractive in most people's view. But they made her look either more attractive or less attractive by giving her kind of frumpy clothes, bad makeup, and a frizzy wig. And it was the frizzy wig that everybody remembers from this experiment. And what she does in the experiment is she poses as a graduate student in clinical psychology who is interviewing male participants, only men in this experiment. And at the end of the interview, she gives them her own personal clinical evaluation of their personality. Okay? So that's all it is. They have this interview with this woman. She's either made to look very good or she's made to look kind of ugly with this frizzy wig. And they talk to her. She gives them an evaluation of their personality. Half of the subjects receive a favorable personality assessment. Half of them receive a kind of unfavorable evaluation. How do they respond? Well, when she was made to look attractive, they were delighted when she gave them positive feedback about themselves. When she was made to look, when she was made to look attractive, but gave them unfavorable information about themselves, they were really upset about it. When she was made to look unattractive, they didn't really care what kind of information she gave. It didn't really matter whether it was positive or not. It didn't really make any difference. It was interesting, in the condition where she was made to look attractive but gave you bad feedback about yourself, often the subjects in that condition would look for an opportunity to interact with her in the future, obviously to try to prove that her evaluation was wrong. It mattered that much to them. So there's kind of this idea that attractive people, their feedback to us has more impact. I'm not saying this is fair. I'm not saying it's rational. I'm not endorsing it. But empirically, empirically, we can see it. That somehow the feedback from the attractive person matters more to us. Okay, number 3 of the more interesting 4, gain-loss. This is really a general idea in psychology that we are in a way wired up to be more sensitive to change than to steady states. And you can imagine why that might be true. Change often signals danger or opportunity. And if we're especially tuned in to change, it helps us survive and it helps us pass along our genes. Okay? So we're more sensitive to change. How does that play out in love? Well, in love, what is very powerful to us is not just that someone always is positive toward us. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love, right? It wears out its welcome. What's more powerful is the person who was not that positive to us, but over time becomes more positive. The first derivative of their regard for us is positive. Okay? Aronson calls this the gain effect. We are really attracted to people whose regard for us is gaining momentum over time. Okay? And even if over a period of time the average amount of their regard is lower, because they started lower and then got higher, than someone who was always high, it's the ones who were first lower who then went up that capture our attention. The first derivative is more important than just the position of their regard for us, getting better and better. Now, what's interesting is there's also a loss effect. People who really hurt us are not the people who have always been negative. The person who every time they sees you, hates you, says they hate you, and accompanies it with an obscene gesture, after a while, this person can't hurt you, right? There's a country song that Ricky Skaggs sings that has the phrase in it, "Nothing can hurt you like the person you love." That's what hurts. The person who always was positive, whose regard starts to fade. You can only hurt the one you love, right? You can only hurt the one you love because you are expecting positive feedback from the one you love. And when that turns negative, it's a blow. It's a blow to the solar plexus, right? So you can only hurt the one you can love, but the one who always loves you sometimes has trouble showing you that they love you. The one who didn't really love you that much, but then starts to show you that they love you, that person is a powerful influence on your behavior.